The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the general store in Randsburg, California, kicking up a cloud of desert dust that seemed to hang in the scorching August air of 1885. And before the driver could even climb down from his perch, a woman stumbled out wearing a travel-stained blue dress, her face streaked with tears that cut pale lines through the grime on her cheeks. Isaac Morrison stood outside the mercantile, a list of supplies crumpled in his work-roughened hand, watching the scene unfold with the same careful attention he gave to evaluating livestock. He had come into town for fence wire and coffee, not to witness someone's private heartbreak, but something about the woman's raw desperation made him pause. She looked around wildly, clutching a worn carpetbag to her chest like it might shield her from whatever demons chased her. The stagecoach driver, a grizzled man named Pete who Isaac knew from previous trips to town, climbed down and retrieved a small trunk from the boot. He set it on the dusty street with a thud that seemed too loud in the afternoon quiet. "This here is all, miss," Pete said, not unkindly, but with the clear intention of washing his hands of the matter. "You sure you do not want me to take you back? Next stage is not for 3 days, but I could arrange something." The woman shook her head violently, sending pins scattering from her dark blonde hair. "No, no, I cannot go back. I cannot." Isaac recognized the accent. Eastern, probably Pennsylvania or somewhere in that direction. Educated, though not wealthy based on the condition of her belongings. He had heard stories about mail-order brides arriving in California mining towns, hoping for better lives than whatever they had left behind. The desperation in her voice spoke of someone who had burned all her bridges. Pete shrugged and climbed back onto the stagecoach. Within moments, the coach rumbled away down the main street, leaving the woman standing alone beside her trunk. She stood there for a long moment, tears still streaming down her face, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Isaac found himself walking toward her before he had consciously decided to move. His boots crunched on the hard, packed earth, and she looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. They were gray, he noticed, like storm clouds over the distant mountains. "Miss," he said quietly, stopping a respectful distance away, "you look like you could use some help." She stared at him, and for a moment he thought she might bolt like a spooked horse. Then her face crumpled and a fresh wave of tears spilled over. "I am sorry," she gasped. "I am so sorry. I should not be carrying on like this in public. It is just all so terrible, and I do not know what to do." Isaac pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her. She took it with trembling hands, pressing it to her face. He waited, patient as he was with skittish cattle, while she tried to compose herself. The street was not particularly busy at this hour, but a few curious townspeople had taken notice of the scene. Isaac recognized Martha Jenkins from the boarding house, her eyes sharp with interest. "Cry all you need," Isaac said, his voice steady and calm. "I will wait right here." The simple kindness in those words seemed to undo something in her. She sank down onto her trunk, the handkerchief pressed to her mouth, and wept like her heart was breaking. Isaac stood there, his shadow falling across her, a silent sentinel while she purged whatever grief or fear had brought her to this state. He was not uncomfortable with tears. He had seen men cry when their wells ran dry, when their cattle died, when the unforgiving desert took someone they loved. Tears were honest, at least. After what might have been 5 minutes or 15, the woman's sobs subsided into hiccups and shaky breaths. She looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes, the handkerchief twisted in her hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are very kind to a stranger making a spectacle of herself." "No spectacle," Isaac said, "just someone having a hard day. I am Isaac Morrison. I have a ranch about 5 miles outside town." "Delilah Harper," she said, and then fresh tears welled up. "Oh God, what am I going to do?" Isaac glanced around. They were starting to draw more attention, and he had a feeling this woman's story was not one she wanted to share with the entire town. "Miss Harper, are you hungry? The hotel restaurant serves a decent meal. Maybe we could talk inside out of this heat." She looked at him with such profound gratitude that it made something in his chest tighten. "Yes, thank you. I have some money I can pay for my own meal." "We will sort that out," Isaac said, not wanting to injure her pride. He picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing, which it nearly did, and waited while she gathered her carpetbag. Together they walked the short distance to the Randsburg Hotel, a two-story building that was the closest thing the mining town had to luxury. The hotel restaurant was dim and relatively cool after the blazing street. Isaac set Delilah's trunk by the door and guided her to a table in the corner, away from the few other diners. The owner, a stout woman named Helen who had known Isaac since he first arrived in the area 6 years ago, came over with a raised eyebrow. "Afternoon, Isaac. This heat is something fierce today." "Helen, this is Miss Delilah Harper. She just arrived on the stage." "We would like some coffee, and whatever you have ready for lunch." Helen's sharp eyes took in Delilah's tear-stained face and rumpled appearance, but years of running a hotel in a mining town had taught her discretion. "I've got beef stew and fresh biscuits. That suit you both." "Perfect," Isaac said. When Helen had bustled away, Delilah looked at him across the scarred wooden table. In the dimmer light, he could see she was probably in her early 20s, with delicate features that would be pretty when not swollen from crying. She had a scattering of freckles across her nose and dark shadows under those gray eyes that spoke of many sleepless nights. "You must think I am a complete fool," she said quietly. "I think you are someone who has had a hard journey," Isaac replied. "If you want to tell me about it, I will listen. If you do not, that is fine too." She studied him for a long moment, and he let her look. Isaac knew what she would see. A man of 32 with sun-weathered skin, dark hair in need of a trim, and steady brown eyes. He was tall and broad-shouldered from years of hard work, dressed in clean but worn ranch clothes. Nothing fancy, but nothing threatening either. Helen returned with coffee, and Delilah wrapped her hands around the cup like she was cold despite the heat. She took a sip, seemed to gather her courage, and began to speak. "I was supposed to marry a man named Gerald Patterson. We corresponded for 6 months. He said he owned a successful mine here in Randsburg, that he was looking for a good wife to help him build a life. I had no prospects back in Philadelphia. My father died 2 years ago and my mother passed last winter. I was living with my aunt, who made it very clear I was a burden. When Gerald's letters came, they seemed like an answer to prayer." Isaac nodded, encouraging her to continue without interrupting. "I sold everything I had to pay for the journey west. It took all my savings and the few pieces of jewelry my mother left me. I was so nervous but also excited. Gerald's letters were kind. He sent a photograph. He seemed respectable." Her hands tightened on the coffee cup. "When I arrived in Los Angeles 3 days ago, I went to the address he had given me for his business associate who was supposed to arrange the final leg of my journey. Do you know what I found? Nothing good, I am guessing. The man said he had never heard of Gerald Patterson. He showed me records. There is no Gerald Patterson with a mine claim in Randsburg. There never was." Her voice broke. "It was all a lie, every word of it. The photograph was probably not even him. I was so stupid, so desperate to escape my situation that I believed every word without question." Isaac felt a cold anger settle in his gut. He had heard of such schemes, men who conned lonely women out of their money with promises of marriage and a better life. "What did you do then?" "The man who ran the office took pity on me. He said I could either use my remaining money to buy a ticket back east, or I could take the stagecoach to Randsburg anyway. He said there were decent people here, that maybe I could find work. She laughed bitterly. I could not go back. My aunt made it clear I was not welcome. I thought maybe I could find something here. But now I am here and I have $17 to my name and nowhere to go and no idea what I am going to do. Helen arrived with 2 bowls of steaming stew and a basket of biscuits. The smell was rich and savory, and Isaac realized he had skipped breakfast in his rush to get to town. Delilah stared at the food like she was not sure she could eat, but after a moment she picked up her spoon. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Isaac's mind was working through the problem the way he worked through any ranch challenge. The solution was obvious, but he needed to think through all the angles before he spoke. Finally, he set down his spoon and looked at her directly. "Miss Harper, I have a proposition for you and I want you to hear me out before you say anything." She looked up, wary but listening. "I need help on my ranch. I have got 200 acres and about 100 head of cattle. I also have chickens, a garden that is struggling because I am not good with plants, and a house that needs a woman's touch. I have been managing alone since I bought the place, but it is too much for one person. I have been thinking about placing an advertisement for a housekeeper, but I have not gotten around to it. You want to hire me as a housekeeper?" Her voice was careful, neither hopeful nor dismissive. "More than that. You came here expecting to be married. I am not suggesting we rush into anything, but I am suggesting we consider it as a possibility. You could come stay at the ranch, help with the house and the things I am terrible at, and we could get to know each other. If after some time we think we could make a marriage work, we will do it. If not, I will pay you fair wages for your work and help you figure out your next step. Either way, you would have a roof over your head and food to eat." Delilah stared at him like he had just spoken in a foreign language. "You are suggesting I come live at your ranch with you as an unmarried woman? Mr. Morrison, that would ruin what little reputation I have left. Which is why I am suggesting we get married first if you are willing, but we can take our time with the rest of it. You would have your own room, your privacy, whatever you need. I am not looking to take advantage of anyone. I am just offering a practical solution to both our problems. You do not even know me. I could be terrible. I could be a thief or a liar or completely incompetent at housework." Isaac allowed himself a small smile. "Are you any of those things?" "No, but you have no way of knowing that. I have been evaluating people and animals for most of my life, Miss Harper. I trust my judgment. You strike me as honest, hardworking, and brave enough to cross a continent for the chance at a better life. Those are good qualities." She sat back in her chair, her stew forgotten. "This is insane. I have known you for less than an hour. You knew Gerald Patterson even less, and only through letters that turned out to be lies. At least you can see I am real, standing right in front of you." That startled a laugh out of her, short and slightly hysterical but genuine. "That is true. You are definitely real." "Think about it," Isaac said. "You do not have to decide this minute. Helen has rooms here. I will pay for you to stay a night or two while you consider. You can ask around town about me, make sure I am not some kind of criminal. I will come back tomorrow and you can tell me what you have decided." Delilah looked at him for a long time, and Isaac met her gaze steadily. He knew this was an unusual proposition, but life in California in 1885 required unusual solutions sometimes. The West was full of people reinventing themselves, making arrangements that would seem scandalous back east, but made perfect sense in a place where survival often depended on practical partnerships. "You are serious," she said finally. "This is not some kind of elaborate joke." "I do not joke much, Miss Harper. Never saw the point." She picked up her coffee cup, found it empty, and set it down again. Her hands were steadier now, he noticed. The crying had stopped and there was a thoughtful expression on her face. If I agreed, we would get married right away. Properly with a minister. We have got a circuit preacher who comes through once a month. He is actually in town today. I saw his horse at the livery. We could be married this afternoon if you wanted, or we could wait for his next visit if you need more time. And I would have my own room. The ranch house has 3 bedrooms. You would have your pick of the 2 spare ones. What would you expect from me? Besides housework and cooking, Isaac considered the question. Honestly, I do not rightly know. I have never been married. I suppose I would hope for companionship eventually, someone to talk to at the end of the day. Maybe friendship. If affection grew out of that over time, I would not complain. But I am not expecting you to play a role or pretend feelings you do not have. You are a strange man, Mr. Morrison. I have been called worse. Delilah pushed her bowl away and folded her hands on the table. Isaac could see her mind working, weighing options, calculating risks. She had the look of someone who had learned to be careful, to think things through. Good. He respected that. I would like to take you up on your offer of a hotel room for the night, she said finally. I would like to sleep in a real bed and think clearly without the panic of not knowing where my next meal will come from. But I will not need 2 nights. I will have an answer for you tomorrow morning. Fair enough. Isaac signaled Helen over and arranged for Delilah to have a room. He paid in advance over her protests, reminding her that she needed to conserve her limited funds. He also ordered a bath to be brought up to her room and paid for that too. As they stood to leave, Delilah touched his arm lightly. Mr. Morrison, thank you. Whether I accept your offer or not, thank you for your kindness today. You have restored a bit of my faith in people. Isaac felt heat rise in his face, uncomfortable with the gratitude. It is just common decency, Miss Harper, nothing special. It is special when you have been drowning and someone throws you a rope. He carried her trunk up to her room, a small but clean space with a window overlooking the main street. When he left her there, he felt oddly reluctant to go. He forced himself to complete his shopping at the mercantile, loading supplies into his wagon while his mind kept drifting back to gray eyes and the sound of desperate crying. The next morning, Isaac was back at the hotel before the sun had fully cleared the mountains. He had barely slept, alternating between thinking his proposition was the perfect solution and worrying he had overstepped badly. When Helen told him Delilah was already downstairs in the restaurant, his heart kicked against his ribs in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. She was sitting at the same table as yesterday, wearing the same blue dress but looking considerably more put together. Her hair was neatly pinned, her face clean, the puffiness around her eyes reduced. She stood when she saw him, her hands clasped in front of her. Mr. Morrison, good morning. Miss Harper, did you sleep well? Better than I have in weeks, actually. That bath was heaven. She took a breath. I have thought about your offer very carefully. I also spoke with Helen and with the man who runs the assay office, a Mr. Peterson, who happened to be having breakfast here. They both spoke highly of you. Mr. Peterson says you are known as an honest man who pays his debts and keeps his word. Isaac nodded, waiting. I am going to accept your proposal with some conditions of my own. Relief flooded through him, though he kept his expression neutral. I am listening. First, I want it understood in writing that if this arrangement does not work out for either of us, we will end the marriage and I will receive enough money to establish myself somewhere else. I will not be trapped with no options again. Agreed. I will have a lawyer draw up papers. Second, I will handle all the household affairs. Cooking, cleaning, the garden, the chickens, whatever needs doing inside and immediately around the house. But I am not going to pretend I know anything about cattle ranching. You will need to be patient if I make mistakes with things I have never done before. Seems fair. I will be patient if you will be patient with me being rough around the edges for civilized company. A small smile touched her lips. Third, and this is important. If we do this, I want to try to make a real marriage eventually. Not right away, but I do not want to just be your housekeeper forever. I want the possibility of something more, or there is no point. Isaac met her eyes. Miss Harper, I want that too. I am not looking for an employee. I am looking for a partner. She nodded slowly. Then yes, I will marry you. They were married 3 hours later in the small church at the edge of town. The circuit preacher, Reverend Thomas, was a practical man who had performed dozens of hasty weddings in mining camps and frontier towns. He asked the required questions, received their affirmative answers, and pronounced them husband and wife with the same efficiency he might use to bless a meal. Helen and Mr. Peterson served as witnesses. Delilah had no ring, so Isaac slipped his mother's wedding band off the chain he wore around his neck and placed it on her finger. It was slightly too large, but she closed her hand around it like it was precious. Afterward, they loaded Delilah's meager belongings into Isaac's wagon and began the journey to the ranch. The road was rough, climbing out of the desert valley into the hills where sparse vegetation fought for survival. Delilah sat beside him on the wagon seat, her hands folded in her lap, her new wedding ring catching the sunlight. "Tell me about the ranch," she said after a while. Isaac was grateful for the neutral topic. "I bought the land 6 years ago when I first came to California. It is not the prettiest place, but it has good water from a creek that runs year-round. The house is sturdy, built by the previous owner who gave up and went back to Ohio. I have been building up the herd slowly, buying cattle when I can afford it. It is not a big operation, but it is mine free and clear." "Where did you come from originally?" "Indiana. My family had a farm there, but I was the youngest of 4 boys. No land left for me to inherit, so I headed west like everyone else looking for opportunity." "Do you miss them? Your family?" Isaac considered the question. "Sometimes. My parents died before I left. My brothers have their own families, their own concerns. We were never particularly close. What about you? You mentioned your parents were both gone." "Yes. It was just me. I have no siblings. My father was a clerk. We never had much money. When he died, my mother tried to keep us afloat by taking in sewing, but she was never strong. The winter was hard and she got sick." Delilah's voice was steady but sad. "Going to live with my aunt was my only option, but she resented having to take me in. She made sure I knew it every day." "Sounds lonely." It was. I think that is why I was so eager to believe Gerald Patterson's letters. He offered me something I had not had in a long time: hope. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking and swaying over the uneven road. The sun was high and hot, but a breeze from the mountains provided some relief. Isaac found himself acutely aware of Delilah beside him, this stranger who was now his wife. It was a strange feeling, neither uncomfortable nor entirely easy. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise. The house was a simple wood structure, weathered but solid, with a covered porch and a stone chimney. Nearby stood a barn, a chicken coop, and a few other outbuildings. A windmill turned slowly, pumping water into a trough where several cattle stood in the shade of the only tree of any size on the property. Delilah studied it all with what Isaac hoped was approval rather than dismay. "It looks sturdy," she said finally. "It keeps the weather out." "That is about the best I can say for it." He helped her down from the wagon, acutely conscious of his hands on her waist. She was lighter than he expected, delicate-boned under the travel-worn dress. She stepped away quickly, looking around with obvious interest. Isaac led her inside, suddenly seeing the place through her eyes and feeling self-conscious about it. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a rough wooden table, a few chairs, and a stove that had seen better days. Dishes were piled in a wash basin. Dust covered every surface. A pair of muddy boots sat by the door. It was, he realized with some embarrassment, exactly what you would expect from a bachelor rancher. "I have not had much time for housekeeping," he said unnecessarily. "I can see that." But Delilah's tone was not critical. "It has good bones." "Where are the bedrooms?" He showed her through a doorway to a narrow hall with 3 doors. His room was the largest at the end of the hall. He opened the other 2 doors to reveal small but adequate spaces. One had a bed frame but no mattress. The other had a narrow bed with a mattress that had seen better days. "I will take this one," Delilah said, indicating the room with the bed. "Tomorrow we can see about getting a better mattress, if there is such a thing to be had in Randsburg. There is a man who makes furniture. I will take you to town next week." They stood in the doorway of what was now her room, an awkward silence falling between them. Isaac cleared his throat. "I should get your things from the wagon, then I need to check on the cattle. I have been away since yesterday morning." "Of course." "I will start figuring out the kitchen." The rest of the day passed in a strange domestic dance. Delilah unpacked her few belongings and began attacking the kitchen with the determination of someone who needed to stay busy. Isaac brought in her trunk, hauled water for her, and then escaped to the barn to tend to animals that made more sense to him than the new reality of having a wife. When he came in for supper, the transformation was remarkable. The dishes were washed and put away. The table was scrubbed clean. The smell of cooking filled the air. Delilah stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot, looking more relaxed than he had yet seen her. "I hope you like beans and bacon," she said. "I did not have much to work with, but I found some vegetables in the garden that were still salvageable. It smells better than anything I have cooked in years." They sat across from each other at the table, eating in a silence that was becoming less awkward with each passing hour. Isaac snuck glances at her, noting the way lamplight caught in her hair, the delicate movement of her hands. She was pretty, he decided, not in a flashy way but in a quiet manner that grew on you. "This is strange," Delilah said suddenly, looking up at him. "What is?" "This morning I woke up alone in a hotel room with no idea what I was going to do. Now I am married and cooking dinner in a ranch house in California. It feels like something that happened to someone else." "Is it a bad strange or a good strange?" She considered the question seriously. "I think maybe a hopeful strange. Ask me again in a week." Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Isaac rose before dawn to tend the animals and work on the endless projects the ranch demanded. Delilah took over the house with a thoroughness that amazed him. She scrubbed and organized and cooked meals that were better than anything he had eaten since leaving Indiana. She coaxed the struggling garden back to life with a patient attention he could never muster. The chickens, which had been producing sporadically under his inattentive care, began laying eggs consistently. In the evenings they talked. At first it was just practical matters, decisions about the ranch and the household. But gradually the conversations deepened. Delilah told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about loving books and learning despite her family's limited means. Isaac found himself sharing stories about his childhood, about coming west, about the challenges of building something from nothing. He learned that she was whip-smart and funny when she relaxed enough to show it. She learned that, beneath his quiet exterior, he had strong opinions and a dry wit that caught her off guard. Neither of them mentioned the elephant in the room, the fact that they were married but living as polite strangers. 2 weeks after their wedding, Isaac took Delilah into town for supplies. It was her first trip back to Randsburg since their hasty marriage, and he noticed how she sat up straighter as they approached, nervousness evident in the set of her shoulders. "People will talk," she said quietly. "Let them. We have not done anything wrong. We got married after knowing each other for an hour. Plenty of folks out here have done the same or similar. It is not unusual." Still, he noticed the stares and whispers as they walked down the main street. Delilah held her head high, her hand resting lightly on his arm as he guided her from the mercantile to the general store to the furniture maker's workshop. At the mercantile, they encountered Martha Jenkins from the boarding house. The older woman looked Delilah up and down with obvious curiosity. "Mrs. Morrison, I hear congratulations are in order." "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins," Delilah said evenly. "It was quite sudden, was it not? You arrived in town in tears and married Isaac before the day was out." Isaac felt Delilah stiffen beside him, but her voice remained calm. "I suppose when you know. Isaac is a good man. Of course. I am sure you will be very happy." But Martha's tone suggested she thought no such thing. After she had bustled away, Delilah let out a shaky breath. That was unpleasant. "Martha means well, but she has a tongue that runs away from her. Ignore it." "Is that what people think? That I trapped you somehow, or that you took advantage of a desperate woman?" Isaac stopped walking and turned to face her, right there in the middle of the street. "Delilah, I do not care what people think. I know the truth of our arrangement, and so do you. That is all that matters." She looked up at him, something shifting in her gray eyes. "You are a good man, Isaac Morrison. I am starting to understand that." Something warm unfurled in his chest at her words. He found himself wanting to say more, to tell her that having her at the ranch had changed everything, made the place feel like a home instead of just somewhere he slept between work. But the words stuck in his throat, and the moment passed. They finished their shopping and headed home with a new mattress and various household supplies. The ride back was quieter than the ride in, both of them lost in thought. That evening, after dinner, Delilah asked if he would teach her to ride. "I have never learned properly," she admitted. "Just carriage horses a few times, very sedately. But I feel trapped not being able to go anywhere on my own." "We can start tomorrow," Isaac agreed. "I've got a mare that is gentle enough for learning." The riding lessons became the highlight of Isaac's days. Delilah was nervous at first, stiff and uncertain in the saddle. But she was also determined, gritting her teeth and trying again every time she felt herself slipping, or the horse made an unexpected movement. Isaac found himself standing close to her, hands ready to steady her, breathing in the scent of soap and sunshine in her hair. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after their wedding, Delilah successfully rode the mare around the corral by herself for the first time. When she dismounted, her face was flushed with triumph and exertion. "I did it," she laughed, breathless. "Did you see? I actually did it." "You are a natural," Isaac said, grinning at her excitement. On impulse, Delilah threw her arms around his neck in a quick hug. "Thank you for being so patient with me." Isaac's arms came up automatically to return the embrace, and suddenly they were standing very close, her body pressed against his. The laughter faded from her face as she looked up at him. He could feel her heart beating, quick and strong, could see the pulse jumping in her throat. "Delilah," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "Isaac," she whispered back. He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She did not pull away. When his lips met hers, soft and questioning, she made a small sound and kissed him back. It was tentative, neither of them quite sure what they were doing, but it sent heat rushing through Isaac's veins like wildfire. When they broke apart, Delilah's cheeks were flushed pink. "Oh," she said softly. "Was that all right?" Isaac asked, suddenly worried he had pushed too fast. "Yes," she said, then more firmly. Yes, it was more than all right. That night, for the first time, Isaac lay awake thinking about his wife not as a practical arrangement, but as a woman he was falling in love with. The realization should have frightened him, but instead it felt right, like something clicking into place. The next morning, when they passed each other in the kitchen, Delilah went up on her toes and kissed his cheek, quick and sweet. "Good morning," she said, smiling. Isaac caught her hand before she could move away. "Good morning, wife." The word, which had felt strange in his mouth for weeks, now felt perfect. From that day forward. Things changed between them, not dramatically but in small, important ways. They sat closer together at dinner. Their conversations lasted longer into the night. When they went to town, Isaac held her hand openly. Delilah started leaving her bedroom door open, and sometimes Isaac would find her reading before bed, lamplight soft on her face. One evening, about 6 weeks after their wedding, they were sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The August heat had broken slightly, and the night air was almost pleasant. Delilah was mending one of Isaac's shirts, her needle flashing in the fading light. "I got a letter from my aunt today," she said suddenly. "It was forwarded from Philadelphia to Los Angeles and finally here. It took weeks to reach me." Isaac looked over at her. "What did she say?" "She wanted to know if I had married Gerald Patterson yet. She said if it did not work out, I should not come crawling back to her." Delilah's voice was matter of fact, but Isaac could hear the hurt underneath. "She made it very clear I burned that bridge when I left. I am sorry. Do not be. It just made me realize something. I do not have to go back. I can stay here, build a life here if I want to." She looked at him sideways. "Do you want me to stay, Isaac? Really stay, not just as an arrangement?" He set down the piece of leather he had been working on and turned to face her fully. "Delilah, these past weeks with you have been the best of my life. I wake up happy. I look forward to coming inside at the end of the day. When I am working, I catch myself thinking about you, wondering what you are doing. So yes, I want you to stay. I want you to stay forever if you will have me." Her eyes were shining in the dusk. "I was so angry when I found out Gerald Patterson was a lie, but now I think maybe it was meant to be. Because if he had been real, I never would have met you, and you are worth 100 Gerald Pattersons." Isaac pulled her close, the mending forgotten, and kissed her properly. She responded with a passion that matched his own, her fingers threading through his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Move into my room," he said. "Be my wife in truth." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want that." That night, Isaac lay beside his wife in the darkness, listening to her breathing even out into sleep. Her head rested on his shoulder, one hand spread over his heart. He thought about the strange path that had brought them together, the lies and losses that had led Delilah to that stagecoach, to that moment of tears and desperation. He thought about his own loneliness, his resignation to spending his life alone. Sometimes, he reflected, the best things came from the worst circumstances. Sometimes you had to lose your way to find where you truly belonged. The seasons changed. Summer's brutal heat gave way to autumn's relative coolness. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Isaac expanded the herd with Delilah's careful bookkeeping showing him exactly how much they could afford to spend. Delilah's garden produced enough vegetables to can for winter and sell at the town market. In October, they made their first real profit, enough to buy a proper stove for the kitchen and glass windows for the bedroom. Delilah cried when she saw the windows, overwhelmed by the gesture. "I wanted you to have something nice," Isaac said, confused by her tears. "They are not just nice, they are beautiful. You listen to what I want. You care about making me happy." "Of course I do. You are my wife. I love you." It was the first time either of them had said the words aloud. Delilah stared at him, her eyes wide. "You love me, did you not know?" Isaac pulled her close. "Delilah, I have loved you since that second week when I came in and found you singing to the chickens because you read somewhere it makes them lay better eggs. You were so serious about it, having a full conversation with those fool birds. I stood there watching you and realized I wanted to watch you do silly, wonderful things for the rest of my life." She laughed and cried at the same time. "I love you too. I think I started falling in love with you that very first day when you stood there and told me I could cry all I needed. You gave me safety when I had none, kindness when I expected judgment. How could I not love you?" They held each other on the porch of their home, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, cattle lowed peacefully. Chickens settled in their coop. The windmill turned steadily, a constant rhythm like a heartbeat. Winter came, mild by Eastern standards but cold enough to keep them close to the fire in the evenings. Delilah taught Isaac to read better, working through books she ordered from San Francisco. Isaac taught Delilah about the ranch, taking her with him to check on cattle, showing her how to spot signs of illness or trouble. They talked about the future, about maybe building onto the house, about children someday. Neither of them was in a rush. They were content to simply be together, to build their partnership day by day. In February, Delilah woke feeling ill. At first she thought it was something she ate, but when the sickness persisted morning after morning, realization dawned. Isaac found her sitting on the edge of their bed one morning, staring at nothing. "What is wrong?" he asked immediately, kneeling beside her. "I think I am pregnant," she whispered. Joy and fear warred on his face. "Are you sure?" "Not completely, but the signs are there. Isaac, I am scared." He took her hands in his. "Why scared? Is it not what we wanted?" "Yes, but my mother died so young. What if something goes wrong? What if I am not a good mother? What if—" "Stop," he said gently. "You cannot borrow trouble from tomorrow. We will face whatever comes together, just like we have been doing." "Together," she repeated, drawing strength from the word. The pregnancy, confirmed by a trip to the nearest doctor in Johannesburg, 30 miles away, changed things again. Isaac became almost comically protective, trying to prevent Delilah from doing any work at all. She had to gently but firmly remind him that pregnant women had been working since the dawn of time, and she was not going to spend 9 months sitting in a chair. They compromised. She continued managing the house, but let him take over the heavier tasks. They hired a young man from town, Peter Sullivan, to help with the ranch work, so Isaac could stay closer to home. The house began to feel full in a way it never had before, with Peter often joining them for meals, his youthful energy adding a new dimension to their quiet life. In early May, as the desert bloomed in a rare wet spring, Delilah went into labor. Isaac sent Peter racing to town for the midwife while he stayed with Delilah, holding her hand through the contractions, wiping her face with cool water, feeling utterly helpless in the face of her pain. "I am sorry," he kept saying. "I am so sorry." "For what?" she gasped between pains. "You did not do this alone, and I want this baby. Stop apologizing and just stay with me." The midwife, a capable woman named Sarah who had delivered half the babies in the county, arrived and took charge. She shooed Isaac out of the room, but Delilah called him back. "No, he stays. I want him here." So Isaac stayed, and in the deep hours of night he watched his wife bring their son into the world with a strength that left him in awe. When Sarah placed the squalling infant in Delilah's arms, tears streamed down both their faces. "He is perfect," Delilah breathed. "Look at him, Isaac. We made this person." Isaac touched one tiny fist with a gentle finger, overwhelmed. What should we name him? They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at their son's scrunched red face, Delilah said, "What about James? It was my father's name." "James Morrison," Isaac tested the sound. "I like it." Little James was a healthy baby with powerful lungs and his mother's gray eyes. The first months were exhausting, filled with sleepless nights and constant worry, but also suffused with a joy Isaac had not known existed. Watching Delilah nurse their son, singing softly to him in the rocking chair they had bought for the purpose, Isaac felt his heart might burst from the fullness of it. The ranch continued to prosper. With Peter's help, they expanded the herd further. Delilah's eggs and vegetables became popular in town, and she began making butter to sell as well. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, secure in a way that would have seemed impossible 2 years ago. On their second anniversary, Isaac took Delilah into town for dinner at the hotel restaurant, leaving James with Sarah the midwife, who doted on him shamelessly. As they sat across from each other at the same table where they had first talked, Isaac raised his glass of cider. "To 2 years," he said. "To 2 years," Delilah echoed, "and many more to come." "Do you ever think about that day, when you arrived on the stagecoach?" Delilah considered. "Sometimes. It feels like a lifetime ago, like it happened to a different person. I was so lost then, so frightened. I had no idea that the worst day of my life was about to become the best." "I think about it often," Isaac admitted. "I think about what might have happened if I had not been in town that day, if I had not seen you crying. What would have become of you? Something else, I suppose. But it would not have been this. It would not have been us." She reached across the table for his hand. "I used to be angry at Gerald Patterson for lying to me, but I am not angry anymore. His lies brought me to you, to James, to the life I have now. I would not change a single thing." "Not even the crying part?" Isaac teased gently. She laughed. "Not even that. You told me I could cry all I needed and you would wait right there. You have been keeping that promise ever since in 100 different ways, waiting for me to heal, to trust, to love. You are the most patient man I have ever known. You are worth waiting for, Delilah. You always have been." They finished their dinner and walked back to collect James, hand in hand under the stars. The little town of Randsburg spread out around them, lights glowing in windows, the sounds of evening activity filtering through the streets. It was a hard place in many ways, unforgiving to those who could not adapt. But it had given them each other, and that made it beautiful. Years passed, marked by the steady rhythm of ranch life. James grew into a sturdy toddler and then a curious boy who followed his father everywhere, asking endless questions about cattle and horses and the wide desert sky. Delilah gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine, after Isaac's mother, and then 2 years later to another son they called Thomas. The house expanded to accommodate their growing family, with Isaac and Peter building an addition that doubled its size. The ranch grew too, slowly but surely, until they ran 300 head of cattle and had hired 2 more ranch hands. They were considered a successful operation, proof that hard work and partnership could thrive even in the harsh California desert. Delilah never lost her love of books and learning. She started a small lending library in town, donating volumes from her own collection and organizing fundraisers to buy more. Children came from miles around to borrow books and hear her read stories on Saturday afternoons. Isaac was impossibly proud of her for it, for taking the education she valued and sharing it with others. For his part, Isaac became known throughout the region as a fair man to do business with, someone whose handshake was as good as a contract. He served on the town council and helped mediate disputes between ranchers and miners, using the same patient common sense he applied to everything else. On a warm evening in June 1895, 10 years after Delilah had arrived in Randsburg in tears, the Morrison family gathered on their expanded porch. James, now 9, was reading aloud from a book about adventure on the high seas, his voice dramatic as he described storms and sea monsters. Catherine, 6, was braiding dandelion stems into a crown while Thomas, 4, chased a long-suffering barn cat around the yard. Isaac sat in his chair, one arm around Delilah, watching his children with contentment so deep it was almost painful. How had this become his life? How had he gotten so lucky? "What are you thinking about?" Delilah asked softly, snuggling closer into his side. "Just that I am a fortunate man." "We are both fortunate. Look what we built together. You built most of it, I just provided the land." "No," Delilah said firmly. "We built it together. That is how partnerships work, how marriages work. Neither of us could have done this alone." She was right, of course. She usually was. Isaac pressed a kiss to her temple, breathing in the familiar scent of her. After 10 years of marriage, he loved her more deeply than he had thought possible. The initial attraction had grown into something richer and more complex, layered with shared experiences, mutual respect, and the profound intimacy of building a life together. James finished his chapter and looked up. "Papa, is it true you and Mama only knew each other for one day before you got married?" Isaac and Delilah exchanged amused glances. "It is true," Isaac confirmed. "That seems fast," James said skeptically. "How did you know she was the one?" "I did not completely. But I knew she was brave and honest, and I figured that was a good foundation. The rest we learned together." "Mama, how did you know Papa was the one?" Delilah smiled. "He was kind when I needed kindness most. He saw me at my worst moment and did not judge me. He just stood there and told me he would wait. That told me everything I needed to know about what kind of man he was." "And you were not scared?" Catherine asked, her eyes wide. "Oh, I was terrified," Delilah admitted. "But sometimes you have to be brave even when you are scared. Sometimes the best things are on the other side of that fear." The children seemed to accept this wisdom and went back to their activities. As the sun set, and the temperature dropped from scorching to merely warm, Delilah's hand found Isaac's, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "You ever wonder what Gerald Patterson was like?" Isaac asked suddenly. It was not something they talked about often, that phantom man who had never existed. Not really. He was just words on paper, lies designed to separate lonely women from their money. "You are real. This is real." She gestured to the ranch, the children, the life surrounding them. "This is what matters. I am glad his lies brought you to me. Does that make me a bad person? It makes you human. Something good came from something bad. That happens sometimes." As darkness fell, they herded the children inside for baths and bedtime stories. Thomas fell asleep mid-story, his small body relaxed and trusting in Isaac's arms. Catherine required 3 glasses of water and 2 trips to the outhouse, prolonging bedtime with impressive creativity. James wanted to read just one more chapter, until Delilah firmly removed the book from his hands and kissed his forehead goodnight. Finally, the house was quiet. Isaac and Delilah prepared for bed with the comfortable efficiency of long partnership, moving around each other in the small space without getting in each other's way. When they finally lay down, Delilah curled into her usual position against Isaac's side, her head on his shoulder. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what? For everything. For that first day, for every day since. For these children, this life, this love, all of it." Isaac pulled her closer. "I should be thanking you. You took a chance on a strange rancher who proposed marriage after knowing you for an hour. Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Isaac corrected. "The best decision was getting off that stagecoach even though you were terrified. Everything else followed from that. They lay in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds through the open window. An owl hooted in the distance. The windmill creaked steadily. Somewhere a coyote called, lonely and wild. Isaac, you think we will still be like this in another 10 years? Happy. I think we will be even happier. We will have more shared memories, more time woven together. Our children will be older, maybe we will have grandchildren someday, but we will still have each other, and that has always been enough. That is a good answer. I have a good teacher. You have made me better at words, Delilah laughed softly. And you have made me better at trusting, at believing good things can happen. I think we are good for each other. I know we are. The years continued to unfold with their mix of joy and challenge. There were droughts that tested their resources, cattle that died despite their best efforts, a fire that destroyed part of the barn and had to be rebuilt. Catherine broke her arm falling from a horse, and they spent a terrifying night waiting for the doctor. Thomas developed a bad cough one winter that had them fearing pneumonia, though he recovered with Sarah, the midwife's careful nursing. But there were triumphs too. James proved to be a natural with cattle, showing an instinct for the work that made Isaac proud. Catherine inherited her mother's love of learning and announced at age 10 that she wanted to be a teacher. Thomas, the youngest, was everyone's favorite, charming and affectionate in equal measure. Peter Sullivan eventually married a girl from town and started his own small ranch nearby, though he continued to help the Morrisons during busy seasons. The bond between the families remained strong, their children growing up together. Delilah's lending library expanded into a proper building, funded by donations from grateful parents whose children had learned to love reading. She spent one afternoon a week there, organizing books and helping readers find their next adventure. It gave her a sense of purpose beyond the ranch, a connection to the wider community. Isaac was elected to a position with the County Livestock Association, giving him influence over grazing policies and water rights. He used that influence to ensure fair treatment for smaller ranchers, remembering his own early struggles. People trusted him to do what was right rather than what was profitable. Through it all, their marriage remained the bedrock everything else was built on. They had disagreements, of course. Delilah thought Isaac pushed himself too hard, working until he was exhausted. Isaac worried that Delilah took on too many responsibilities, unable to say no when people asked for help. But they learned to voice their concerns, to listen to each other, to compromise when necessary and support each other always. On their 15th anniversary, Isaac took Delilah to San Francisco for a week, leaving the children with Sarah and her grown daughter. It was their first real trip together, their first time away from the ranch since their marriage. They stayed in a hotel that was fancier than anything they had ever experienced, ate in restaurants, and saw a play at a real theater. Walking along the waterfront one evening, watching ships come and go from all over the world, Delilah leaned against Isaac's shoulder. "This is wonderful, but I miss home." "Is that silly?" "Not silly at all. I miss it too. I miss the quiet, the space, our bed. These city folks live all crammed together. How do they breathe? I am glad we live where we do. I am glad our children are growing up with room to run and work to do and knowing the value of things. You have given them that, your strength, your values. They are good children because they have a good mother. They have a good father too. You have taught them honesty and hard work and kindness. James is growing up to be just like you." Isaac felt emotion tighten his throat. "That is the greatest compliment you could give me." They returned home to 3 children who had desperately missed them, and a ranch that had survived a week without them, proof that their operation was strong enough to withstand their absence. Life resumed its comfortable rhythm. In 1902, When Delilah was 39 and Isaac was 49, they learned she was pregnant again. It was a surprise, their youngest already being 10 years old. The pregnancy was harder than the others had been, leaving Delilah tired and uncomfortable. Isaac hovered constantly, driving her to distraction with his worry. "I am fine," she insisted for the 100th time. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "But you are not as young as you were," Isaac said, then winced. "That came out wrong." "No, you are right. But that does not mean something will go wrong. Have a little faith." The baby, another son they named Daniel, arrived in late February after a difficult labor that terrified Isaac. But both mother and child came through healthy, and the house was once again filled with the sounds of an infant. James, now 16 and nearly as tall as his father, proved surprisingly good with his baby brother. Catherine, 13 and in full bloom of adolescence, declared the baby absolutely precious and helped with him constantly. Thomas, 11, was less interested but dutifully held Daniel when required. The addition of another child stretched their resources, but the ranch was successful enough to absorb the extra expense. Isaac found himself thinking about succession, about what would happen to the land when he was gone. James clearly loved ranching, but Catherine wanted to teach and Thomas talked about being a lawman. What would become of everything they had built? He discussed it with Delilah one evening while nursing Daniel. "We will leave it to all of them equally," she said firmly. "James can run the ranch if he wants, but the others should have their share to do with as they please. We built this together, and our children should all benefit from it equally. What if James wants to keep ranching but the others want to sell? Then they will work it out among themselves. Isaac, we cannot control what happens after we are gone. We can only do our best while we are here and trust that we raised our children to make good decisions." She was right, as usual. Isaac pulled her close, careful not to disturb the nursing baby. "How did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher. You have shown me how to think about the long term, how to plan and build for the future." "We make a good team. The best team," she agreed. As Daniel grew from infant to toddler to a small boy, the Morrison ranch continued to thrive. James took on more responsibility, preparing to eventually take over operations. Catherine left for teachers' college in San Diego, her parents enormously proud despite missing her desperately. Thomas surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to study law rather than become a lawman, showing an academic bent no one had expected. Isaac and Delilah watched their older children leave home with mixed emotions. Pride in their accomplishments mingled with sadness at the empty spaces around the dinner table. But Daniel, their late-life surprise, kept them busy and reminded them of why they had fallen in love in the first place, watching each other navigate parenthood. In 1910, 25 years after their wedding, Isaac woke to find Delilah already up, standing at the bedroom window watching the sunrise. He joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about so early?" he murmured against her hair. "Just that it has been 25 years, a quarter century since I stepped off that stagecoach. Best 25 years of my life, mine too." She turned in his arms to face him. "Isaac, I need to tell you something." His heart lurched with fear. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. I just need you to know that if I could go back to that day, knowing everything that would happen, every challenge and hardship and moment of fear, I would not change a single thing. This life with you has been more than I ever dreamed possible." Relief and love flooded through him. "I feel the same way. Sometimes I still cannot believe you took a chance on me. You made it easy. You showed me who you were from the very beginning. Patient and kind and steady. Those are the things that matter in the long run." They stood at the window watching the sun paint the desert in shades of gold and orange, the ranch spreading out below them like a testament to what two people could build together. 25 years of work, of love, of partnership. Not perfect, but real and solid and theirs. The years continued their steady march. Catherine married a fellow teacher and had twin daughters who adored visiting the ranch. Thomas passed the bar exam and opened a law practice in San Francisco, specializing in property law. James married a rancher's daughter from Johannesburg, and they began building a house on the north section of the Morrison land, preparing to take over operations as Isaac and Delilah aged. Daniel, their youngest, showed signs of inheriting both his mother's love of learning and his father's skill with animals. At 10 years old, he could gentle a skittish horse better than ranch hands twice his age, but he also devoured every book he could get his hands on. Isaac was 62 now, his hair more gray than brown, his body showing the wear of decades of hard physical labor. He moved slower than he used to, his joints protesting the cold of winter mornings. But his mind was sharp, and his love for his wife had only deepened with time. Delilah at 52 had laugh lines around her eyes and silver threads in her blonde hair. She was still beautiful to Isaac, more so than ever because her beauty was earned, marked by years of smiling and thinking and living fully. She had grown into herself in a way that left him in awe. On a spring evening in 1915, 30 years after their wedding, the extended Morrison family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Catherine came with her husband and daughters. Thomas made the trip from San Francisco with his new wife, a judge's daughter he had met through work. James and his wife were there with their two young sons. Friends from town filled the expanded house and spilled out onto the porch and yard. Isaac stood at the edge of the celebration, watching his wife move through the crowd, greeting guests, making sure everyone had food and drink. She laughed at something Martha Jenkins said, the old busybody who had questioned their hasty marriage, now one of Delilah's closest friends. She hugged Sarah the midwife, now elderly but still sharp as ever. She kissed Daniel's forehead as he ran past chasing his nephews. James appeared at Isaac's elbow. "Quite a party, Papa. Your mother knows how to bring people together. You both do. This ranch, this family, it is all because you two built something solid." James paused, then added, "I hope I can do half as well with my own marriage. You already are. I see the way you look at Rebecca, the way you work together. You learned from watching us, just like I learned from watching my parents fail at it. We all do better than the generation before if we are lucky. I am lucky. We all are. You and Mama showed us what a good marriage looks like." Isaac felt emotion swell in his chest. His eldest son, now a man of 29 with his own family, still looked to him for guidance. It was humbling and frightening and wonderful all at once. As the evening wore on and the sun set in a blaze of color, someone called for a toast. The crowd quieted, glasses raised, all eyes turning to Isaac and Delilah where they stood together on the porch. "Speech," someone called out, followed by more voices taking up the cry. Isaac hated speeches, always had, but he could not refuse with everyone looking at him expectantly. He glanced at Delilah, who squeezed his hand encouragingly. All right," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "I will keep this short because you all know I am not much for talking. 30 years ago, my wife stepped off a stagecoach in tears, frightened and alone. I was a lonely rancher who thought he would probably spend his life alone. We made an arrangement that seemed practical at the time, got married, and figured we would see how it went." Laughter rippled through the crowd. What I did not expect was to fall completely in love with this woman. What I did not expect was that she would take my empty house and make it a home, take my lonely life and fill it with joy, take my rough edges and smooth them with patience and kindness. What I did not expect was all of this. He gestured to the crowd, the family, the thriving ranch around them. But Delilah taught me to expect good things, to believe in possibilities. So here is to my wife, my partner, my best friend. Thank you for saying yes 30 years ago. Thank you for building this life with me. Delilah's eyes were bright with tears. Now I have to follow that, she said, making everyone laugh. Isaac said he is not much for talking, but he always knows exactly what to say when it matters. 30 years ago I was lost and scared and thought my life was over. Then a kind man offered me hope when I had none. He told me I could cry all I needed and he would wait right there. He has been keeping that promise ever since, through every joy and every sorrow, through good times and hard times. Isaac Morrison is the best man I have ever known, and I thank God every day for bringing me to Randsburg, to him, to this life. Here is to 30 more years. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Glasses clinked, people embraced, and the party continued late into the night. Isaac and Delilah stood together in the center of it all, surrounded by the family and friends and life they had built from nothing but hope and hard work. Later, when the guests had finally departed and their children were settled in various rooms around the house, Isaac and Delilah sat on their porch in the familiar chairs they had occupied for decades. The desert night was cool and clear, stars brilliant overhead. "That was a good party," Delilah said, her hand finding his in the darkness. "You did a good job organizing it. We did a good job, together like always." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "Do you ever think about how different our lives could have been? If you had been busy that day, if you had not noticed me, if you had decided I was too much trouble. I try not to think about that. It is too terrible to imagine. I think about it sometimes, not in a sad way, but just marveling at how much one moment can change everything. If I had stayed in Philadelphia, if I had not believed Gerald Patterson's lies, if I had turned back instead of coming to Randsburg, our children would not exist. None of this would exist. But you did come. You were brave enough to get on that stagecoach even though you were terrified. That says everything about who you are. We saved each other, I think. We gave each other the thing we needed most. I needed safety and kindness. You needed companionship and purpose. Together we became more than we were alone. That is what the best marriages are. Not two halves making a whole, but two wholes making something even better." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, surrounded by the life they had built. Inside, their youngest son slept peacefully. Scattered across California, their older children had homes and families of their own. Beneath the stars, cattle grazed on land they had worked for 30 years. It was not a grand legacy by some standards, no great wealth or fame, but it was real and solid and good. The years continued to pass, marked by grandchildren being born, by the slow transfer of ranch operations from father to son, by the gradual slowing that comes with age. Isaac developed a persistent cough that worried Delilah until the doctor pronounced it nothing serious, just the result of decades of breathing dust. Delilah's joints ached more each year, making the simple tasks she once did easily now require effort and determination. But they adapted as they always had. They spent more time sitting on the porch, watching the world go by. They took pleasure in small things, morning coffee together, the sound of their grandchildren playing, letters from Catherine and Thomas describing their busy city lives. Daniel grew into a thoughtful young man who decided to become a veterinarian, combining his love of animals with his intellectual curiosity. He left for veterinary college back east, leaving the ranch quieter but filled with pride at his ambition. In 1920, 35 years after their wedding, Isaac woke one morning to find his body simply would not cooperate the way it used to. His joints were stiff, his breathing labored. Delilah took one look at him and insisted on sending for the doctor despite his protests. The diagnosis was not surprising. His heart was wearing out, decades of hard labor taking their toll. The doctor prescribed rest, limitation of activity, all the things that went against Isaac's nature. But one look at Delilah's frightened face convinced him to comply. James took over all ranch operations, visiting daily to consult with his father and keep him involved. Delilah fussed over Isaac constantly, making sure he followed doctor's orders, preparing special meals meant to strengthen him. Isaac endured it all with patience, grateful for her care even when he felt smothered by it. One evening, sitting in their usual spots on the porch, Isaac said quietly, "I am not ready to leave you." Delilah's hand tightened on his. "Then do not. Fight to stay with me. I am trying. But I also need you to know that I am not afraid. Whatever time we have left, whether it is years or months or days, I have had a good life. Better than I deserved. You gave me that. We gave it to each other," she said fiercely. "And you are not leaving me yet. I will not allow it." He smiled at her determination. "Yes, madam." Isaac did fight, drawn by love of life and love of his wife. He followed doctor's orders, rested when told to rest, took the medicines prescribed. Gradually, his condition stabilized. He would never be strong again, would never work cattle or build fence, but he could sit on the porch and watch the ranch function smoothly under James's management. He could hold his grandchildren and tell them stories. He could lie beside his wife each night and be grateful for another day. Their 40th anniversary in 1925 was a quieter affair than their 30th had been. Just immediate family gathered, a small dinner rather than a grand party. But it was perfect in its simplicity, surrounded by children and grandchildren, celebrating 4 decades of partnership. 40 years, Delilah marveled. "It seems impossible. Where did the time go into all this?" Isaac said, gesturing to the family around them. "Into a life well lived." Catherine raised her glass. "To our parents who showed us what love looks like." "To Grandma and Grandpa," added one of the grandchildren, and the toast was echoed around the table. That night, lying in bed in the darkness, Delilah said, "Thank you for fighting to stay with me. I know it has not been easy. Easiest fight I ever had. I have too much to live for. Promise me something, anything. When the time comes when you really cannot fight anymore, promise you will not suffer just to stay. I love you too much to watch you in pain." Isaac was quiet for a long moment. "I promise, but the same goes for you. We made a bargain 40 years ago to face life together. Let us face the end the same way, honest and brave." "Deal," she whispered, and he felt her tears on his shoulder, but that time was not yet. The years continued, slower now but still sweet. Isaac's health remained stable, neither dramatically better nor worse. He adjusted to his limitations, finding joy in things that did not require physical strength. He read more, enjoying the books Delilah had been urging on him for decades. He taught his grandchildren to play chess. He chronicled the history of the ranch in careful handwriting, wanting future generations to know the story of how it all began. The nation changed around them. The Depression came and went, leaving scars but not destroying what they had built. Daniel returned from veterinary school and opened a practice in Randsburg, close enough to visit regularly. James's sons grew into capable young men who would someday carry on the family business. In 1935, on the 50th anniversary of their wedding, the family gathered once more. Isaac was 77 now, Delilah 67. Their children were middle-aged, their grandchildren teenagers or young adults. Even a few great-grandchildren toddled around, the youngest generation. Standing before the crowd, Isaac thought back to that day 50 years ago when a frightened young woman had stepped off a stagecoach and changed his life forever. The journey from that moment to this one seemed both impossibly long and startlingly brief. 50 years, he said when called on for the inevitable speech. Half a century with the woman I love. People sometimes ask me the secret to a long marriage. I tell them the truth. We got lucky. We found each other at the right moment when we both needed what the other had to give. But luck is only the beginning. The real secret is deciding every day to keep choosing each other. Through disagreements and hardships, through boring routine and exciting challenges, we kept choosing us. We kept showing up for each other. That is what makes a marriage last. Delilah, tears streaming down her weathered face, added, "Isaac tells it true. But I will add this. Marry someone kind. Everything else, the passion and the excitement and the romance that comes and goes, but kindness endures." Isaac was kind to me on the worst day of my life, and he has been kind every day since. Choose kindness, and the rest will follow. The celebration continued late into the evening, filled with laughter and stories and love. When it was finally over and they were alone in their bedroom, Isaac held Delilah close. 50 years, he marveled. We have been married longer than we were alive before we met. More of my life with you than without you. I cannot even remember clearly who I was before. That girl on the stagecoach seems like someone from a story. She was brave and strong and beautiful, just like you are now. We are old, Isaac. We are blessed, Delilah. She smiled against his chest. Yes, yes, we are. 2 years later, in the spring of 1937, Isaac's health began to decline. It was gradual at first, a general weakness and increased difficulty breathing. But it progressed steadily despite Daniel's best medical efforts and the family doctor's interventions. By summer, it was clear the end was approaching. Isaac faced it with the same patient courage he had shown throughout his life. He made sure his affairs were in order, that James understood how the ranch should be run, that Delilah would be taken care of. He said goodbye to each of his children and grandchildren, giving them final bits of wisdom and love. One evening in late August, with Delilah sitting beside his bed holding his hand, Isaac said, "Remember our promise. No suffering just to prolong things." "I remember," she whispered, her face wet with tears. "I am not afraid, love. I'm just sad to leave you, but I will wait for you wherever we go next, just like I waited for you that first day." "You promised you would wait right there," Delilah said, her voice breaking. "You have been keeping that promise for 52 years. Best promise I ever made." He lifted their joined hands, kissing her knuckles with effort. "Thank you for getting off that stagecoach. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for this beautiful life. Thank you for seeing me when I was lost. Thank you for offering hope. Thank you for loving me so well." They sat in silence as the sun set outside the window, painting the desert in the colors they had watched together for over half a century. Isaac's breathing grew shallower, more labored. Their children gathered quietly around the bed, saying goodbye, telling him it was all right to go. As the stars appeared in the darkening sky, Isaac took one final breath, Delilah's hand tight in his, and slipped away peacefully. Delilah laid her head on his chest and wept, grieving the loss of her companion, her love, her other half. The funeral was well attended, the church packed with ranchers and townspeople whose lives Isaac had touched over 5 decades in Randsburg. Delilah sat in the front row, surrounded by her children, accepting condolences with dignity even as her heart shattered. In the weeks that followed, she found comfort in routine and in family. James and his wife insisted she move into their house, but Delilah refused. The ranch house was full of memories, and she was not ready to leave them behind. Instead, Daniel moved back home temporarily, keeping her company and making sure she ate and slept. Slowly, painfully, Delilah adjusted to life without Isaac. She woke each morning expecting to see him beside her and felt the loss anew when she found only empty space. She set the table for two out of habit, then had to put away the extra plate. She caught herself starting to tell him things before remembering he was gone. But she also found moments of peace. Watching the sunset from their porch, she felt his presence beside her. Reading the ranch history he had written, she heard his voice in the words. Looking at their children and grandchildren, she saw his legacy living on. 5 years later, in the spring of 1942, Delilah died peacefully in her sleep, her body finally giving out at age 74. Her children found her in the morning, lying in the bed she had shared with Isaac, a peaceful expression on her face. On the nightstand beside her was the photograph from their 50th anniversary, showing them both smiling, hands clasped, surrounded by family. At her funeral, Catherine spoke for all the children. Our mother taught us about courage and perseverance. She showed us that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best things. She took a terrible situation and turned it into a beautiful life. She loved our father with everything she had, and he loved her the same way. They were partners in the truest sense, building something remarkable together. We miss her terribly, but we know she is with Papa now where she wanted to be. Delilah and Isaac were buried side by side in the Randsburg Cemetery, their shared headstone simple and honest. Delilah and Isaac Morrison, partners in life and love. 1885–1937, 1863–1942, together always. The ranch continued under James's stewardship and eventually passed to his sons. Catherine's daughters became teachers, carrying on their grandmother's love of education. Thomas's children followed him into law. Daniel's son became a veterinarian like his father, the fifth generation of Morrisons in California. Each generation told the story of how it all began. A mail-order bride who arrived in tears, and a lonely rancher who told her she could cry all she needed. He would wait right there. It became family legend, the foundation of everything that followed. The story of two people who found each other at exactly the right moment and built something that lasted beyond their lifetimes. Decades later, a great-great-granddaughter named Emma Morrison would stand in that same spot in Randsburg, where Delilah once stepped off the stagecoach. The town had changed dramatically. No longer a rough mining camp, but a small desert community with paved roads and modern conveniences. But the essence remained the same, a place where people came seeking new beginnings. Emma held an old photograph of Isaac and Delilah, studying their faces. She could see the love there, captured in the way they looked at each other, the way their hands intertwined. She thought about the courage it must have taken for Delilah to get on that stagecoach, to travel across a continent alone, to trust a stranger with her future. She thought about Isaac's patience, his willingness to wait while his wife learned to trust and love. Their story had shaped her entire family, teaching each generation about resilience and partnership, and choosing love every single day. It was a legacy that could not be measured in acres or cattle or money, but in the strength of family bonds and the endurance of love across time. Emma tucked the photograph carefully into her bag and looked around the small desert town. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of orange and gold just as it had for Isaac and Delilah all those years ago. Some things changed, but some things endured. Love endured. Family endured. The courage to take chances and trust in possibilities endured. She smiled, thinking of her great-great-grandparents and the remarkable life they had built from tears and kindness and hope. Their story was over, but its impact continued, rippling forward through time. touching lives they would never know, proving that sometimes the best love stories start with the worst days, and that patience and kindness can build something that lasts forever.